Alexandra, are there any organizations that folks can shout out that they admire for the ways they intentionally try to dismantle power and oppression in their organizations? I'd love to use the chat for that if people do want to do that shout out, and I will put that question to the panel. Are there some examples out there that you're working with or that you're aware of that are doing this work of dismantling and rebuilding and distributing power?
I'll just quickly jump in with a couple resources. So there's a very interesting burgeoning cooperative movement that's popping up all over the United States. I think the Bay Area is the most progressive. There's an organization called Project Equity that's actually helping people like workers. I think they're mostly in the manufacturing. I don't think they've entered, though, correct me if I'm wrong, services yet, but they help people buy out their organizations, right? So, and it's not just ESOPs, it's actually employee-owned organizations, and they make collective decisions and they distribute power. So that automatically means that they distribute wealth as well. So cooperatives have been shown to people make a lot more money, people stay near 100% rates of retention. That's one resource. Democracy at Work is another. There are a lot of organizations like that are popping up that are talking about participatory decision-making and self-management in the workplace. That the Democracy at Work is a good starting point. There are endless amount of resources now that mostly coming out of Europe as well, and South America, and actually all over the world. So, but those are two places to start to take a look.
Excellent. There's a question here from Sinyi around accountability mechanisms that we can suggest, especially for junior employees, ways to hold leadership accountable. And I'll let the panel think on that, and I'll take a quick stab at answering it from some experiences that I've had trying to hold a bureaucracy accountable, one of those big amorphous kind of healthcare system. And some success that I had in that was forcing leadership's hand to really clarify values, to operationalize values, to say, hey, that thing up on the wall, that patient-centered statement, what does that actually look like? And how important is that? And I spent 2 years resisting some pretty, what I thought were detrimental changes to a program that I was managing, just doing that, just forcing the hand of like, hey, you say patient-centered, but then you're talking about making this decision. And those two, help me understand how that supports this. Oh, it doesn't. Oh, well, then I guess we should have a deeper conversation about it. And so that was me resisting change, and through accountability, through what was hopefully a shared set of values. And eventually it came to the place of like, yeah, we say that, but we don't actually mean that. We say patient-centered, but more important than patient-centered is saving some money or something. But it kind of forced the hand to make it transparent what the decision-making criteria was behind what was being asked. And so then at least we're talking about the truth. We're not thinking that we're talking about this value of, and I see this all the time where you walk into a boardroom and it says collaboration up on the wall, and then you sit in on the meeting or you watch the behavior. It's like, that's not collaborative. So what's more important than collaboration? Something else is more important. Let's actually talk about that thing, and let's force leaders to acknowledge that, to come to terms with that. And then we're at least having an open and honest discussion about what's truly important to the team. And so I've had some success with getting values named and the associated behaviors really clarified. So that's one thing. Panel, any other ideas on accountability for leaders, mechanisms that exist or that people can try?
Yeah, I would suggest two things. The first thing is having the organization or suggesting that they implement something like a 360-degree feedback system. The way that performance reviews usually occur within organizations is top down, where managers are giving feedback to their direct reports, but direct reports and junior employees don't have an opportunity to also give managers feedback. So I think introducing some sort of 360-degree feedback system that allows employees to anonymously rate or give feedback on their managers is really important, and is a good system that I think you could encourage the company to implement. And not being able to advance within an organization without receiving that feedback is really important. I don't see this happening a lot within organizations. But I also think when people are coming into the company, HR plays such a vital role in assessing people's commitment to equity. And there should be questions in the employment interview that assess a person's interest or commitment to equity. I don't see these questions a lot. Sometimes companies let people into the organization and they have no interest in, promoting equity or fostering an inclusive workforce. So I think assessing those things from the beginning is really important.
And I'll add a couple more things. Like, so I think one, if you're new to the organization, definitely make the calculus to protect your own mental health and your own survival in the organization. That's primary for you, right? Especially if you're from a historically excluded community. Your own level of comfort is important. Second thing, I think a great way to think about it is bridging the proximity to power gap. So like if you're involved in a kind of mentoring program, make the mentoring program work both ways. So like the people being mentored have access to power, and they're the ones keeping the accountability, like keeping the changes top of mind. And two, another way of doing that is if you do establish an employee resource group, a good thing to do is establish a executive sponsor. So somebody who's the champion in the executive team or C-suite who is championing your specific employee resource or group of ERGs. So bridge that proximity to power gap as best as you can, with the caveat that your survival in the organization is the most important thing.
One tiny addition I have, because I'm typically in the context where people are already, we had set up a little differently, where you might have one group that is kind of working in the context of power. And my advice on that particular situation is to totally have your act together and to be realistic about what you can and cannot do, because the groups that typically come to me get completely caught up in, we want to change this, we want to change that, but we don't actually have the power to do. So they end up using all their energy on things that they can't affect. So it's like, no, first we're going to carve out what you have power over, and then we're going to make sure you have your act together on acting on that, right? But not kind of fight all the battles at once, I guess. But that I know just affects a very particular subset of situations. I just wanted to add that.
Ivory had asked, with the goal of DEI being a long journey to achieve, how do you effectively strategize what issues to tackle so that you're constantly progressing on the journey? I thought that was a really great question.
There's so much that can be, right? There's just so much. How do you prioritize? That's a great question. Janice, any thoughts, or Ted or Farzin?
Yeah, I think it depends on the organization. I think doing something like an equity audit is helpful, where you're looking at the structures and systems and the ways that the company does things. So what is the process to hire people? What is the process to promote people? How do you develop employees? And looking within those processes to see where there are holes in the process and where the process could get better. But the problem is junior employees don't have a lot of power to change the structures. If you don't like the way that you are, if you don't like the performance management system or tool that's being used, I don't know if one employee can change that, but I think collectively coming together, you do have a lot of power. So I would say assessing the structures within the organization and the systems in which things are done to see where the most attention should be put. And I do think it's important to do things sort of like one by one, because I think where companies, I don't want to say fail, but where companies sort of have missteps is where they try to do too many things at one time. I'm a firm believer in focusing on one thing and doing it really well, and then kind of moving on to something else versus trying to tackle so many things at one time. So I think really figuring out where are we, is it that we're letting toxic people into the organization? So how do we make sure that we're stopping them at the door? How do we make sure that we're holding them accountable? And what is the best way to do that? So I would say determining what the most pressing systemic issue is, and then figuring out what sort of interventions you can create to address that. So it might be the culture is toxic. It could be leadership. And how do you hold them accountable is an important question. Do you have anonymous systems where people can give feedback? Because I don't see that a lot, where people have completely anonymous channels to share their experiences. So that was kind of long-winded, but hopefully it was helpful, Ivory.
Yeah, no, I think you're on point with that. And it's interesting. That's a lot of the initial workplace consulting work that we do here at the ALICO, is to create those anonymous pathways to get the true experience so that we can consolidate it and help organizations prioritize, figure out which problems to prioritize. And they're coming from the employees, not the leader, right? Because the leader's viewpoint into what the problems are always inevitably different than what the actual experience is of everybody else in the organization. And so I like that, maybe taking a step back and assessing, doing a little bit of assessing, because sometimes we charge off on what feels like the most important thing, and we're chasing oftentimes symptoms of problems of that we could put our attention to something a bit deeper and more foundational. So that's a great advice. Yeah. There's more questions rolling in. So go for it, Farzin. Yeah.
I want to compound both of what you said. I see that exactly the same thing when we do our DEI surveys. The thing I want to add is that people are experts in their own relationship with the society, right? They know what they're experiencing. We don't have to gaslight them to say you're not doing this, right? What the expertise comes in is figuring out, collecting this data and saying, oh, you know what? This intervention goes deep, and it may have like address 2 or 3 concerns that one little change may have a, maximum amount of, output, kind of positive sort of outcomes from it. And that's where the expertise lies. I think when you really have to understand how, you really have to be a DEI expert, as well as understanding how to do these, to maximize the kind of the information that's drawn out from the surveys themselves. So you got to be knowledgeable on how to build the surveying, the focus groups, the interviews, and things like that. And so I think that sort of data-led approach to compound, Jeff and Janice, what you were saying is super, super important as at least a jump off. And to make it iterative over time, like things don't necessarily work. You get feedback and realize this isn't, working. We try again, experiment.
Right, we've got a few more questions rolling in here. Jordan, do you want to hop on the mic? And we're a small enough group now, so if you wanted to ask your question, about local government, dominant culture.
Absolutely. This is kind of just where I'm hoping to go in the future, and I'm really trying to figure out how to, we have a majoritarian election system in the US, so it's always the dominant culture, majority culture in most cases, that rules everything. And even if 1 or 2 or a handful of people get elected to like a legislative body, for example, or like a local board, that's still not enough to get over that majority space. And I'm just really trying to think of ways and find solutions to that, like where we can like truly bring voices to the table. And like this is one of the situations where I see like building like your own table is particularly difficult in terms of government, because it's already so well established.
I have 2 examples of something. Again, this is just from a sociocratic lens. I know 2 examples of where people one is a parallel system basically, and one is working within the system. So one thing I know is somebody in Brazil was getting elected on a town or district level, and she ran with a collective mandate. So, and they internally were basically organizing themselves differently. So that's a whole thing about something. But I think what you're asking for is going more in the direction of the second example I have, and that is neighborhood parliaments. And they started in India, and it's super inspiring stuff. And what they've been doing is they basically started organizing people by neighborhoods, 30 here, 30 here, and then, sending people up and so on, like they have, I think it's 11 layers to get to a national level. Obviously, not everybody is part of it, but it's hundreds of thousands of people, it's still a lot, just given the population of India, it's still just a little droplet, but still. But what is really inspiring about that one is I heard stories of people saying, even like they have also a children's parliaments. that they were at a point where the children's parliaments and the neighborhood parliaments had so much trust from the population that people say, oh, if you want to get something from the actual, from the formal government, go through the neighborhood parliament, then you will be heard, So they've really kind of started to become a little threatening to the formal government. We're still not at a place of replacing it, right? But it's becoming really, really heavyweight in some areas, and I'll put some links in the chat.
Great, thanks, Ted. Mars, you've asked a question about 360, and I saw Janice, you've written out a little bit of a thread there about 360s as a mechanism for accountability, and that's also something we do a lot of at the Ally Co. Is the employee experience, but also the 360s for leaders, because a lot of leaders don't actually know what their impact is what I find. There's a lot of unintentional misuses of power, right? And there's a feedback bubble that exists often. So how do we break that feedback bubble when it comes to 360s? Any thoughts on setting those up or advocating for them, especially if there's resistance, maybe from leadership? What's any advice or thoughts on that?
Yeah, actually, Jeff, to add on top of that, hi everyone. It's that my org is pretty advanced in being liberatory, but there's some leaderships who are covertly stifling voting power, purposely like stopping like a mission and vision retreat, so we don't get to like the core issues, so we don't learn the history of the org. So I guess I'm wondering if I'm basically, you could say I'm the junior, I'm the youngest at the org, but yet I put myself in that position to be the sacrificial lamb so we can move forward, because I was recognizing all the behaviors. I am the one who catch the behaviors, even though I'm the lowest one there. So I guess I'm trying to understand, like I am protecting myself. I am taking rest. I am taking care of my mental health. I do go to therapy and talk about all this BS stuff that's happening. But to move forward and not to be stagnant along with this, and like kind of like, how do we take away the folks who are stifling the work and who is being problematic and who is like just having that hidden agenda of like money at the back end versus the programs that we're doing. So it's like, I guess I'm looking for advice on that from anybody who has any kind of ideas on how to help, because I feel like I'm doing everything that y'all are kind of saying, and the folks, some of the majority of the folks at the org are on the same playing field of wanting to move this way, but the covertness is very strong.
I wish you were at a lunch and learn we did a couple of weeks ago on intention and impact and closing that gap and figuring out. So I'll send you some stuff. I've probably got your email, and I'll follow up properly with some thoughts on that, because helping leadership, individual leaders, recognize the misalignment that they have between the organization or their employees or those people. Like, it sounds like there's a misalignment problem and you're not able to get back into alignment because you don't have the power to force that conversation, right? And so it's figuring out who might have the power to force that conversation if it's not you. And if there is a collective of people who have a desire, like, how are you organizing yourselves internally to force that conversation? And the beauty of getting an external person, a Farzine to come in, or a Janice or Ted or a Jeff to come in, is that we're often given that mandate to align an organization. And so, off the top of my head, one question that I might ask, if there's resistance to a vision and mission retreat, you're advocating for it and you're getting it turned down, and it's saying, no, not right now. It's like, well, help me understand how we're going to move forward as a company without having a shared vision. And those types of questions, how is this actually helpful? How is this moving us forward? How is this aligning us with our mission and our values? Forcing leaders to interrogate that. It's like, actually, you're right. We need a shared vision and mission. Okay, well, starting from there, it doesn't have to be a retreat. We don't have to spend 3 days offsite with a facilitator to do that work. We can do that work in a different way. And so it's prioritizing the work, because oftentimes leaders will stop the mechanism and they'll get in the way. They'll throw stuff in the gears of the actual, like, we don't have the budget to go offsite. We don't have the budget to do X, Y, or Z. It's like, okay, there's 1,000 ways to build a vision, right? And to do that work. So that kind of holding leaders accountable and highlighting their misalignment or their lack of willingness to engage in alignment would be where I would start. And if you don't have that power, maybe it's a group of you that has that power. Maybe it's somebody else in the organization that you can leverage for that. I mean, it's tricky territory for sure. But off the top of my head, it sounds like how do we get people into alignment? Any other thoughts on that one? It's a big topic.
Yeah, it's challenging. And I see that that Mars put in the chat that it is a nonprofit. which I think makes it even more challenging in nonprofits, because that is a whole different sort of animal when you think about it. But I would ask if it doesn't, I'm guessing the answer is no, but I would first ask if there's ways for you to give feedback in an anonymous way. It doesn't sound like there is. I'm making an assumption, but I would say some of the organizations I've worked with, I've seen how helpful that can be, those anonymous channels where employees are able to write things in and give feedback, and then someone in HR or someone within the org gets that feedback, and so they're able to address it. But it seems like there may not be that system in place, and if you do write something, there may be, given what you've shared about your positioning in the company, there may be a way to trace it back to you if you give that feedback. So I think it's that situation is really difficult, but I do think having someone external come in can oftentimes shake things up a little bit, because when we come into organizations, we don't know about the politics and the dynamics and all of those things. So sometimes we come in for a very specific purpose to like realign the folks. Like, I love the word that Jeff used as far as alignment. And so I think that might be great. Also sharing resources with leadership, but again, and finding those people that, I don't know if there are those people in your organization that are more open to change, or those change makers, because sometimes there are those people that do have power that you can align yourself with or chat with, who you can come together with to try to create change. But I'm not sure as far as like the structure, if you have those channels or outlets for communication. But I do think that maybe having someone outside come in to help with the realignment can be really helpful, because that person that comes from outside may say the exact same things, Mars, that you might have been saying, but it's coming from someone different. For whatever reason, leadership might be more receptive to it. I hope that was somewhat helpful, maybe not as much, but please keep us posted if Mars, if you could connect with us on LinkedIn, and please keep us posted, because I would love to get an update on it, because I know it's hard, especially at nonprofits.
Yep. No, for sure. Thank you. It was very helpful, and I will definitely stay connected.
Yes. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, for sure.
Excellent. Well, I've now used 20 minutes of everyone's time letting this thing run. And I actually, today's a huge day for us. We've got a big webinar coming up in about an hour. So Cedar. So thank you for throwing that in. Power is relational, even though we often don't think of it that way, or we might see it as something else, but it's always relational. It always exists in relationship with an organization, a person, a system. It's part of that felt experience. So I would definitely recommend checking out Cedar's work, rightUseOfPower.org. I don't know when the next training is. I know there was one recently, but it's coming up probably in the next few months. Cedar can maybe throw a link in there to that, because that's honestly, there's been a few things that have been helpful in my journey through the nonprofit sector into the kind of the world of consulting. And it's been the Right Use of Power framework. It's been nonviolent communication, the work of Marshall Rosenberg. And those two probably actually stand out for me. And I'm interested in learning much more about sociocracy, because I've been around the edges of that. And so Ted and I are going to have a good conversation about the connections here between the right use of power and sociocracy, because I think there's a lot to be discovered and to be looked at there as complementary systems of how we organize ourselves, how we make decisions, how we relate to each other and to the work. So again, thank you all for coming out, and I'm going to have to call it, and we'll maybe line up around 2 if there's enough interest. So thank you all for coming, and thanks panel.
Have a great Thursday. Bye, everyone.